You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In Chicago's South Side, residents of a crumbling high-rise began vanishing without a trace. The only thing they had in common? Each one reported the same dream before disappearing, of a faceless man tapping on their 9th-floor window, in a building that only had 7 floors. When a private investigator digs into the case, he uncovers a long-buried government experiment from the 1970s, one that opened a doorway to something not of this world. What he finds on the hidden 9th floor will haunt him forever. If you love true crime wrapped in supernatural horror, stories with real conspiracies, buried evidence, and terrifying twists, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because at Soul Studios, the stories you hear, they watch you back. It began with a missing persons case like nothing I'd seen before. In early October 2024, Chicago police recorded the disappearance of a single mother named Marisol Vega from a government-subsidized high-rise on the South Side. On the surface, a missing resident in that part of the city wasn't unusual. Poverty, crime, and neglect often made people vanish from the system. But something about Marisol's case caught my attention immediately. The baffling circumstances and an eerie detail no one could explain. According to Marisol's 2 young children, their mother had been acting strange for days before she vanished. She hardly slept, kept the lights on at night, and would stare at the living room window with dread. On the last night they saw her, Marisol woke them up past midnight, trembling. She insisted they all pray together. "He is watching again," she whispered to her kids. When they asked who she meant, Marisol only responded in a shaking voice, the faceless man tapping on the glass. Moments later, the children heard a faint, steady tap, tap-tap coming from the window of their apartment. Marisol told her kids to stay in the bedroom and went to confront it. She never came back. By the time neighbors broke down the door, Marisol was gone, and the living room window was wide open to the frigid autumn air. No sign of entry. No balcony or fire escape, just a sheer 9-story drop. And yet, there was no body below. The only clue was a single handprint on the outside of the glass, a handprint far too high for any person to leave. Chicago PD was baffled. They filed it as just another missing person and moved on. But I was sure something more was going on. Marisol's case wasn't the only one. In the past year, 4 other women from that building vanished under similarly bizarre circumstances. All lived on the top floor, and all of them had reported recurring nightmares of a faceless man tapping on their apartment window in the weeks before they disappeared. And yet the building has only 7 floors, no 9th floor at all. When I first read that detail in a thread of community posts discussing the disappearances, I had to pause. A 9th floor window in a 7-story building? It made no sense. It wasn't a misprint either. Multiple witnesses mentioned the 9th floor and the faceless man. Whispers around the neighborhood called him the Watcher. Real people were missing. Real children were now motherless. Something very real and very dangerous was lurking behind that impossible detail. As a private investigator and former cop, specializing in strange unsolved cases, I decided I needed to find out what was happening at that high rise. If there was any truth to these stories, Marisol and the others didn't just vanish. They were taken by something beyond our understanding. I headed out to where it all began, the decaying high-rise on the South Side, where the Watcher in Unit 9 was said to dwell. That afternoon, I arrived in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood, where Langford Tower stood alone amid vacant lots. This 7-story subsidized high-rise was a decaying relic, somehow spared demolition, while other notorious housing projects were torn down. It loomed beside the roaring Dan Ryan Expressway like an unwanted sentinel. Inside, the lobby was dim and smelled of mildew and old smoke. Near the mailboxes, a wilted flower and a teddy bear sat beneath a photocopied flyer of Marisol's face. The sight strengthened my resolve. I met the property manager, Ray, in the lobby. He eyed me warily. "I told the cops everything I know," he muttered. "This place ain't safe. Could be gangs, could be anyone." Before I could respond, a voice called out from above, startling us both. "You hear about that Vega girl?" We looked up. At the 7th floor landing, a petite elderly woman in a threadbare housecoat peered down the stairwell. Her grey hair was tied back and she squinted at me with keen, sunken eyes. Ray cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Henley, mind your business," he called up. He quickly excused himself and retreated down the hallway, wanting no part of this conversation. Ignoring him, Mrs. Henley beckoned to me. "Come on up, then. I'm in 706. I climbed the stairs to the 7th floor. Mrs. Henley waited by her open door, apartment 706. She invited me inside. The air was stale and tinged with menthol. The furnishings were straight out of the 1970s. She motioned for me to sit on a plastic-covered couch as she settled into a creaky armchair. "Don't mind Ray," she said, "but he knows better than to cross them." "Them?" I asked gently. "You mean whoever's behind these disappearances?" The old woman's lined face tightened. "Whoever, whatever, I don't rightly know, but it ain't gangbangers or dopeheads taking people. It's this building." She tapped a bony finger on a chair arm. "There's something wrong here ever since it opened." "Please," I urged softly. "Anything you can tell me might help." Mrs. Henley nodded, eyes distant with memory. "I moved in here the summer of 1971, when Langford Tower first opened. Back then it was actually nice and new, but almost immediately odd things started happening. They had some folks from the government set up a so-called mental health outreach office on the 8th floor, supposed to help residents with counselling and such. Rumour was it was government-funded. People volunteered for treatments. Mostly folks with troubles, you know. Well, come 74, there was suddenly a big to-do. One night we heard alarms, saw people in a panic. Next thing we know, the 8th and 9th floors were sealed off completely. They relocated everyone who lived up there, even moved me from the 8th floor down to 7. Construction crews came in and literally sealed the stairwell and elevator access to those floors. Management told us it was always a 7-story building, like we all just remembered wrong. She gave a dry, humourless laugh. "I may be old, but I remember living on the 8th floor before they moved me. They even removed the elevator buttons for 8 and 9. But some of us know the truth." "Why would they do that?" I asked, leaning forward. Mrs. Henley's voice lowered. "Something bad happened up there, that's why. Those government folks, they were running experiments, treatments, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure on the details. They didn't exactly advertise it. But I know a young fellow from down the hall who volunteered. He came back one day wrong, babbling about seeing shadows and a man with no face standing over his bed. Poor guy lost his mind and... well, he didn't make it." She paused, as if digesting the memory. "So I figure they were doing something to people's minds on those floors. And one day they let something loose." Her eyes shifted to the window, as if checking for unseen watchers. After they sealed the top, they acted like nothing happened. But weird things still occurred now and then. Every so often, someone would swear they saw a dark shape in the stairwell at night, or heard tapping on their window when nobody could be out there. Over the years, one tenant went missing in the 80s, another in the 90s, enough that we whispered about the Watcher again. "That name, the Watcher," I repeated. "You and the other residents call it that?" She nodded. "Just something we started saying after the floors got closed. We jokingly called it the ghost in Unit 9. But it's no joke. It's real." She stared at me gravely. "Ever since those experiments, there's been a presence in this place. I can't explain it, but I've felt it. Others have too, and now people are disappearing again." I felt a chill, but tried to remain composed. "The people running those experiments, do you remember any names? Agencies?" She pursed her lips. "They were hush-hush, no uniforms, always in plain vans. But I do recall the woman doctor who checked on me once. Dr. O'Neill, she called herself, and there was a young assistant too. I suspect they were with the government. They had that cold, clinical air about them." Mrs. Henley's gaze bore into me. "Are you really going to poke around up there? After all these years, I thought I'd die before seeing the 8th and ninth floors opened again. Maybe they shouldn't be. Her words hung in the dusty air. I swallowed and promised, I'll be careful, and thank you, truly, for telling me all this. I left Mrs. Henley's apartment and stepped back into the dim hallway. What she'd told me sounded like the plot of a horror film. Secret government experiments, something unleashed. But I believed her. It explained so much: the sealed floors, the faceless figure in the nightmares, the disappearances. Inside, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I was more certain than ever that the answers lay beyond that hatch to the off-limits floors. Without wasting any time, I headed down to the basement. I decided to find the building's maintenance office. If any records or clues from the past remained, they might be there. And if a way existed to reach those hidden floors, I needed it. The basement maintenance office was behind a heavy door marked Authorized Personnel Only. It was locked, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. After making sure no one was watching, I jimmied the cheap lock with a screwdriver and slipped inside the musty little office. Along the back wall were rows of dusty file boxes and rusted cabinets, probably untouched for years. I clicked on my flashlight and began rifling through drawers of old inspection reports, work orders, anything that might conceal a secret. After a few minutes, I discovered a large envelope stamped with an official seal. U.S. Department of Health, Education and Welfare. My heart pounded as I slid out the contents. Inside was a trove of documents from 1972 to 1974, labelled as a HUD-AEW pilot study and marked as MK Ultra Subproject 108. MK Ultra, the infamous CIA mind control program from the Cold War. Here was proof that a CIA-funded experiment had taken place in this very building under the guise of a housing wellness program. Among the files, I found Dr. O'Neill's personal journal entry from the night everything went wrong. Journal entry, November 3rd, 1973. Dr. Lenore O'Neill, I am recording this in haste, unsure if anyone will ever read it. The project has become a nightmare. Tonight, during what was to be our final test, something went terribly wrong. Subject number 8, C. Evans, was mid-dose of IK Delta when he began screaming about the faceless man. His restraints snapped, not because he broke them. It was as if some force tore them apart. The lights flickered and went out. We heard a loud cracking noise and the entire floor shook. When backup lights came on, subject number 8 was gone. Not escaped, simply gone from the locked room. We soon discovered an unspeakable presence with us. I saw it only briefly in the strobe of the emergency light. A tall silhouette in the corner, featureless face reflecting the light like pale flesh. It moved impossibly fast. One technician was lifted into the air and thrown against the glass observation window, shattering it. Dr. Xie took off running toward the stairwell. I do not know if she made it out. I heard her screams echo from somewhere above. This entity, this parasite of the mind that we have unwittingly unleashed, shouldn't exist in our reality. I suspect the compound opened a door, and now it refuses to shut. I have triggered the evacuation alarm and am heading out. God forgive us for what we've done here. We will seal off the 8th and 9th floors and pray that contains it. I fear for anyone who remains. Project Midnight Dawn is terminated. We must bury this. I was stunned. The documents described a nightmare that had been locked away up there for half a century. An experiment designed to enhance perception had instead torn open a doorway to something horrific, something that had stayed behind when they sealed the floors. It all made sense now. The faceless man, the tapping, the vanishings. The experiment had unleashed a parasite from another dimension, trapped in this building and hungry for victims. Despite my fear, I knew I had to confront it. I carefully tucked Dr. O'Neill's papers into my coat for evidence. If this entity was still bound to those hidden floors, I would have to face it on its own turf to stop it. I prepared my equipment, a strong flashlight, a voice recorder to document everything, a crowbar to pry open the hatch, and my old service pistol for whatever good it might do. Steeling myself, I made my way up the stairwell to the 7th floor landing where the hatch to the sealed levels waited. There, in the ceiling above the landing, I could make out the faint outline of a square hatch door, edges smeared with plaster. A heavy padlock latched its center. I took a deep breath. This was the doorway to the nightmare. I thumbed the record button on my voice recorder, leaving a brief whispered message for my loved ones in case I didn't survive. Then I slid the recorder into my jacket, gripped the ladder rungs hidden behind the hatch, and began to climb upward into darkness. I pulled myself up into the pitch-black 8th floor corridor. My flashlight beam cut through floating dust in the stale air. Faded room numbers marked the metal doors lining the hall. One door, 8 out of 5, hung slightly ajar. Inside, it was no longer an apartment at all. Medical equipment lay scattered, a rusty gurney, an upturned stool and a reclining chair with frayed leather restraints. This matched Dr. O'Neill's journal description exactly. Glass crunched under my shoes. An observation window had been shattered between this room and an adjacent little monitoring station. A chill ran through me as I realized I was standing in the middle of that secret clinic of nightmares. Every room revealed some variation of the same horror. Padded isolation cells, hospital beds with restraints, even dark stains on the floors and walls. The entire floor had been converted into a makeshift experimental ward, then abruptly abandoned. At the far end, the stairwell door to the 9th floor was sealed with a metal bar across it. In the corner, a vertical ladder was bolted to the wall, leading up into an open hatch in the ceiling. Faded red paint next to it simply read 9th. Climbing it would take me into the heart of whatever darkness dwelled here. I placed a foot on the bottom rung. Above my head something creaked. "Hello?" I whispered into the void. No answer. Up I went. I hoisted myself through the hatch and into a low-ceilinged mechanical loft, the elusive 9th floor. Concrete columns and snaking ducts crisscrossed the area. It was much smaller and more confined, never meant for tenants. Debris littered the ground, coils of old cable, a toppled file cabinet, splintered planks. Then my light fell upon something that stopped my heart. At the far end, in front of a large vent opening, stood a figure. Tall, gaunt, vaguely human in shape, but completely featureless. It had a head and limbs, but its face was just a smooth oval of pale flesh, no eyes or mouth at all. Faint city lights trickled in through the vent slats behind it, haloing the outline of this impossible being. My heart slammed against my ribs. I've faced armed killers without flinching, but this was different. Terror threatened to paralyze me. Slowly I drew my pistol, keeping my flashlight trained on the figure. "Marisol?" I croaked, irrationally hoping it might somehow be one of the missing women. The figure cocked its head in that unnatural, jerky motion Mrs. Henley had described, as if it recognized the name. Then it took a single, soundless step toward me. Predatory. Deliberate. I forced myself to click the flashlight to its brightest setting and aim the beam right at it. A blinding cone of light cut through the darkness. The faceless thing hissed, a dry, rasping sound, and recoiled from the glare. In that moment I saw its face fully. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, waxy skin stretched over where a face should be. And then it vanished. 1 second it was standing there, the next there was nothing but dust dancing in my flashlight beam. I heard it scuttling rapidly around me. First a scrape to my left, then a metallic clang to my right. It was fast and I couldn't see it. I pressed my back to a concrete column, gun raised, sweeping the flashlight in wide arcs. "Show yourself!" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. Only silence replied. Suddenly, wham! Something struck me hard from the side, tossing me into a pile of wooden crates. I hit the ground with a teeth-rattling crash. Pain shot through my shoulder. My flashlight skittered out of my hand, its beam now spinning wildly around the room. In the strobing chaos of the rolling flashlight, I glimpsed the figure skittering along the wall on all fours like an enormous insect. It let out a guttural click and lunged at me again. I rolled away just as it smashed down on the crates where I'd lain a split second earlier, splintering them. Panicked, I squeezed off a shot. The muzzle flash lit up the darkness for an instant. I saw the bullet rip straight through the creature, and it shrieked. A horrible, ear-splitting sound, but definitely a reaction. I scrambled backward, lungs heaving. It could be hurt, or at least angered. The faceless thing wasn't done. An invisible force suddenly grabbed my ankle and yanked. I yelped as I was dragged across the gritty floor. Desperately, I kicked my free leg again and again at empty air. On the third kick, my boot connected with something solid, and the grip on my ankle loosened. I tore my leg out of its grasp and staggered to my feet, panting. The entity flickered back into view a few yards away, half shrouded in shadow. It seemed to be struggling to maintain its form in the flashlight's intermittent glow, perhaps weakened by my gunshot. But it was still blocking the way to the hatch. I was cornered. It edged closer. I had one last trick. With trembling hands, I snatched up my flashlight from the floor. As the creature rushed forward with a bone-chilling growl, I flipped the light to its strobe setting. The flashlight began pulsing intense bursts of light rapidly into its blank face. The effect was immediate. The faceless horror recoiled, disoriented by the barrage of flashing light. It flinched and stumbled, its form blurring in and out of view. Seizing the moment, I swung the heavy flashlight with all my might and cracked it across the creature's head. There was a loud crunch. The thing reeled backward, momentarily stunned. This was my chance. I bolted for the hatch, half climbing, half falling down through the opening. As I slid down the ladder to the 8th floor, something whooshed past the back of my neck, a hand grasping and missing me by inches. I dropped onto the 8th floor, then rushed to the ladder leading down to 7 and practically leapt down it. Above, an explosive bang shook the structure as the enraged entity slammed into the hatch. A furious, unearthly wail echoed down the stairwell after me. I tore down the stairwell as fast as my legs would carry me. The building lights flickered as that wailing, faceless monstrosity gave chase somewhere above. It sounded like a hurricane of angry whispers and screams swirling just a floor or two behind me. At the bottom, I burst out of the 1st floor exit into the lobby. I slapped the fire alarm on the wall and shouted, "Fire! Evacuate!" at the top of my lungs. Instant chaos. Alarms clanged and residents, roused by the noise, began spilling into the halls. I herded everyone I saw toward the exit. "Out now!" I barked, not caring if I had to scare them. Within a minute, a flood of confused tenants were pouring out of the building into the chilly night. I stumbled outside along with them, gasping for breath. People milled around in confusion, looking up at the building. The alarm blared on. For a moment, nothing happened. Then 2 top-floor windows shattered outward, but nothing emerged. I had the sense that the watcher was there, just behind the broken glass, writhing in fury but unable to step out into open air. Within minutes, fire engines and police cruisers swarmed the street. If that thing was still inside, I hoped to God it was burning or drowning. I was battered and exhausted, but alive. And I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was up there had finally been forced into the light. The next morning, the city hastily condemned Langford Tower. Within a week, demolition crews began tearing down that cursed high-rise floor by floor, under the watch of some unusually tight-lipped government inspectors. I tried to get Dr. O'Neill's documents to the press, but the story was swiftly quashed by authorities. It was clear the powers that be were intent on burying Project Midnight Dawn forever. Marisol Vega and the others were never found. I know now they never will be, whether they were taken into that other dimension or simply consumed by the entity. Officially, no one ever acknowledged anything supernatural, but I haven't moved on. In quiet moments, I find myself replaying every detail, wondering if I could have saved those people, or if I truly destroyed that entity, or merely drove it away. Sleep doesn't come easily. When I do dream, I often find myself back on that 9th floor. And I hear a soft tapping on the glass far above the ground, and sometimes late at night in my own home I'll hear it, a faint tap, tap, tap on my bedroom window. And yes, I live on the 9th floor. You've just heard the terrifying truth behind a government experiment buried for decades, one that opened a door to something that was never meant to cross over. The victims weren't imagining the faceless man tapping on their windows. They were glimpsing the thing that had been watching us all along. And while Langford Tower is gone, what came through it may still be out there, looking for a new window to tap on next. Some buildings hide secrets. This one hid a doorway. And the Watcher is still looking in.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.